Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah shir. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav. We're continuing to learn Hilchos Chanukah. And in today's shir we will learn Mirz Hashem Daf Kuf Mem Gimel Amud Beis and a nice piece of Kuf Mem Daled Amud Aleph as well. So let's get going. So we're holding in Siman Taf Reish Ayin Gimel. We began Sif Beis yesterday on the bottom of Kuf Mem Gimel Amud Aleph. For the sake of context, I'm going to read from the beginning of Sif Beis. Bottom line, Kuf Mem Gimel Amud Aleph, says the Mechaber, Hadlaka Oisa Mitzvah. And as this was explained by the Mishnah Berurah in Ois Katan Chav Hey, what this means is you actually accomplish the mitzvah of the Hadlaka when you light the Neris. So even though there's a minimal amount of time that the Neris have to burn, we learned that the Neris are supposed to burn for a half an hour. That's the Zman Ad Shetichle Regel Min Hashuk. But you accomplish the mitzvah of Hadlakas Neris right when you light the menorah. Now, in Ois Katan Chav Hey, we learned if you light the menorah in a windy place and they burn out, you should go ahead and relight them. You have to have the proper amount of shemen, the proper amount of fuel in the nair when you light the nair. But all things being equal, when you light the Hanukkah licht, you have already accomplished the mitzvah. Therefore, says the Mechaber, Lefikach, im kavsa kaidem she'avar zmana, if the lichtalach go out before they burnt for the proper amount of time, before they burnt for a half an hour, Einoi Zokok, you are not responsible to go ahead and relight them because you already accomplished the mitzvah. When you lit them, you accomplished the mitzvah. Again, if you lit them in a very windy place and they burnt out, they blew out, so then you should go ahead and you should relight them, albeit without a bracha. You don't make another bracha. But that's because you lit them in a place where it was very unlikely that they would burn for the proper amount of time. We're also going to learn later on in Siman Taf Reish Ayin Hey that when you light them, they have to have the proper amount of shemen in them to burn for a half an hour. So there are sort of like caveats over here. There's another very interesting biur halacha here on Kuf Mem Gimel Amud Aleph, which is another reason why I went back. Biur halacha dibur maschel im kafsa einoi zakuk. Let's see what the biur halacha says here. He says, Achein be'es hadlaka be'inan shia b'shemen sheyuchad lahadlik kishir v'chanal b'sibet taf reish ayin beis siv beis. He mentions that, yes, we do have to have the proper amount of shemen inside the nair when we light them. And now continues the Chavetz Chaim, and nearly it seems to me, the kemoikein be'inon shebe'es hadlaka yiyeh kol haneros lefi cheshbon hayamim. This is a very interesting little catch in this halacha of kavsa ein zakuk. What's the halacha of kavsa ein zakuk? Since hadlaka is a mitzvah, since you accomplish the mitzvah right when you light the neris, so if the neris go out 5 minutes later, you don't have to relight them. Says the Chavetz Chaim, in his opinion, there's a very interesting catch. Let's say it's the 6th night of Hanukkah. I don't know why I always pick the 6th night of Hanukkah. Let's say it's the 6th night of Hanukkah. You make the brachas, you light the first nair, you light the second nair, you light the third nair. Now, you're about to light the fourth nair, and the third nair goes out. All right. Kavsa ein zakuk. Goes out, you're not responsible to relight it. Let's see what the Chavetz Chaim says here. Venerally, the kemoikein, b'yinon shebe'es hadlaka, we need that when you light the neros, yiyeh kol haneros lefi cheshbon hayamim. We have to have that the proper amount of neros are burning at one time. So if it's the 6th night of Hanukkah, you have to accomplish lighting all 6. V'oz nechshav l'mahadr min mahadrin, because that's the only way you're going to be makayim mahadrin min mahadrin. The minig of mahadrin min mahadrin that we're noyig says that on the 6th night of Hanukkah you have to have 6 neris burning. So if you light 1 through 3, and then you go to light number 4, and number 3 goes out, and now you say kavsa ein zakuk, I don't have to go back and light it, then by the time you finish your lighting, you're only going to have 5 neris burning. How could you now say that you were Makayim Mahadrim and a Mahadrin? You never had 6 Neros burning. So says the Chavetz Chaim, even though it's true, kavsa ein zakuk la, but at some point, you have to have had all of the Neros burning. So in my case, if you light 1 through 3, then you go light number 4 and number 3 goes out, says the Chavetz Chaim here in this Biur Halacha, go back and relight number 3, even though kavsa ein zakuk la. Because if not, you're never going to have 6 Neros burning, and you're not going to be Makai Mahadrim and a Mahadrim. Valkain, therefore, says the Chavetz Chaim, Im Kavsa Achas Kaidim Shehishlim Hahadlaka, if one of the Neros goes out before you complete the lighting, Tzarech Lachzar Ulahadlika, you do have to go back and light that one, because otherwise you're not Makayim Mahadrin min HaMahadrin. V'da'oid, and furthermore you should know, says the Chavetz Chaim, Damasha Amru Einoi Zakikla. So first he told you a shtick ala chumra. He said that even though kavsa ein zakukla, if you never got the proper number of Neros burning at the same time, you should go back and you should relight the one that went out to be Makai Mahadrim and a Mahadrim. That's a little bit of a chumra, that despite kavsa ein zakukla, you should go back and you should relight it to be Makai Mahadrim and a Mahadrim. Now he says you should know a kula, and that is v'da'oid, you should know. Damasha amru einoi zakikla, this halacha that we say kavsa ein zakikla, afilu kavu kulam, is even true if all of the Hanukkah Neros go out. So it's the 6th night of Hanukkah, you lit all 6, and now 10 minutes later they all go out. So you don't have a single Ner Hanukkah that burnt for the proper amount of time, still kavsa ein zakikla. Why, says the Chavetz Chaim? Deloy be'inon persume nisa rak be'ez hahadlaka. You are Mekayim the mitzvah of Parsume Nisa through Hadlakas Ner Hanukkah when you lit. And once you did that, you accomplished the mitzvah, Kavsa in Zakukla, you do not have to relight anything. Okay, the other thing that I do want to point out is we should remember the bottom line in the Mishnah Berurah here at the end of Ois Katan Chav Hey, where he said, "Upashit, it's obvious, de'emu raya shehaor ein nechaz ba'apsila." If when you're lighting the Hanukkah licht, you see that it never caught, ubevada yichbe b'mehera, and it's definitely going to go out right away, she'ena yoytza b'hadlakazu, then you are not yoytza. We don't say hadlaka oisa mitzvah because you never really did a hadlaka. V'tzarich b'dina lachzar lahadlika lachar akfiyah, and you would have to light it over again. Okay, so far what we've seen over here is Hadlaka Oisa Mitzvah. You accomplish the mitzvah of Hadlakas Neres Chanukah right when you light it, and even if they subsequently go out and they never burnt for a half an hour, it doesn't matter. Kavsa in Zakutla, you are already Yoitza the mitzvah. And what the Mechaber said was, Lefikach im Kavsa Kaidem Sha'avar Zmana, even though they went out before the requisite half hour, and you're not responsible to relight it. That's what we were up to. Now let's go weiter. Top line, Kuf Mem Gimel Amud Beis. Va'afilu kavsa be'erev Shabbos, kaidem Kabbalah Shabbos. This is a very interesting case. We know that on Erev Shabbos, you light the Neros earlier than usual, because let's say usually you light at Tzeisak Echavim, or a few minutes before Tzeisak Echavim. You can't do that on Erev Shabbos. That would be Ben Hashmashas. You can't do Malacha. You can't do Havara Ben Hashmashas on Erev Shabbos. So Erev Shabbos, we have to light before Shkia. So you're lighting early on Erev Shabbos, and indeed you're lighting while it is 100% still day. So again, let's say Friday night you're going to light 6 Neros. Shabbos is the 6th day of Hanukkah. When are you going to light those Neros? You're going to light 6 Neros on Erev Shabbos before Shkia, when it's still the 5th day of Hanukkah. So says the Mechaber, a Chiddush here. He says, Va'afilu kavsa be'erev Shabbos kaidem Kabbalah Shabbos. Even if you lit your 6 Neros on Erev Shabbos, which you did before Kabbalah Shabbos, Sha'adayin hu miba'id yoim, it's still day, and now they went out, Eina Zakukla. You're not responsible to go ahead and relight them. Now the Chiddush over here is, you want to tell me that during the week, Kavsa ein Zakukla, so that means that on Wednesday night, you lit your Neros Chanukah. When did you light them? You lit them Bizman Chiyuva. You lit them at a time when the chiyuv of Hadlakas Neros Chanukah applies. It's already the night going into the next day of Hanukkah. So you lit them, you were mekayim the mitzvah, kavsa, they went out, they zokuk. You're not achroi to relight them because you were already mekayim the mitzvah when you did the Hadlaka. But on Erev Shabbos, you didn't really do the Hadlaka b'zman chiyuva. On Erev Shabbos, you did the Hadlaka very early. Still, says the Mechaber, Hadlaka oisa mitzvah, when you do that lighting, you accomplish the mitzvah, and kavsa ein zakukla. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut in chavav, she'adayin hu miba'ayoyim. Hatam, the reason why this works, explains the Mishnah Berurah, the reason why we could still say Hadlaka oisa mitzvah in this case is kevan shebe'erev Shabbos. Since the bottom line is, on Erev Shabbos, you're mechuyev to light before Shkia. You have no choice, because you can't do malacha after Shkia. Not only are you mechuyev to light before Shkia, Erev Shabbos is different than the other days of Hanukkah. The other days of Hanukkah, the chiyuv to light Hanukkah licht, let's say according to the Mechaber, is Tzeis HaKechavim. Not so on Erev Shabbos. On Erev Shabbos, the chiyuv to light Neros Chanukah is earlier, because you have no choice. You can't do malacha on Shabbos. V'gam kvar birach aleh adlak Neros Chanukah. And indeed, when you do make that hadlaka, you make the bracha, and you say vitzivanu. So apparently you are lighting the Hanukkah licht at the proper time, at the Zman Chiyuva, just the Zman Chiyuva is different on Erev Shabbos than the rest of the week. Kvar huschala ha-mitzvah behechsher. That means that when you did that hadlaka, you did the hadlaka at the proper time. You already began the mitzvah behechsher. That's called the Zman HaMitzvah. And therefore, the same way hadlaka isa mitzvah the rest of the week, hadlaka isa mitzvah on Erev Shabbos too, even though it's early. Vayin betaz, however the Chavetz Chaim says, take a look at the Taz, shecholik al zeh, he argues on this halacha of the Mechaber. V'daita, in his opinion, is the kaidem Kabbalah Shabbos, you lit on Erev Shabbos before Kabbalah Shabbos, sheyesh adayin heter lahadlik, if you still have enough time before Shabbos, that it's still mutter to relight, mechuyev lachzar lahadlik ubli bracha, you're mechuyev to relight the neros without a bracha. There's a very nice Dirshu footnote over here that explains this machlokes very nicely. Dirshu footnote number 36 explains the position of the Mechaber. Again, the position of the Mechaber is, even though you lit very early, because it's Erev Shabbos and you can't do malacha after the Zman, so even though you lit the Hanukkah Neros on Erev Shabbos miba'od yom, still hadlaka isa mitzvah and kavsa ein zakukla. Says the footnote here, number 36. V'av she'ikar mitzvah hi balayla. Even though in reality the ikar mitzvah of Neros Chanukah is later, it's at night. Bir b'shalos teshuvas shevet halevi. Rav Osder in the shevet halevi explains b'shem shalos teshuvas chasam sofer. He's basing it on a chasam sofer, and it's a beautiful way of putting it. She'kevan she'i efshar l'shmainas yemei Chanukah b'loy Shabbos. There is always a Shabbos on Hanukkah. Hanukkah is 8 days. So there's always a Friday night. So Friday night is not like a rare exception in Hilchos Chanukah. When Chazal were misakin the mitzvah of Neros Chanukah, intrinsic in that takana was a Friday night licht. They always knew there was going to be a Friday night licht. In Cain, therefore, kishetikdu chachamim lahadlik der Chanukah, when the Chazal were misakin the mitzvah of Neros Chanukah, heim tikdu v'chivu lahadlik lechatchila be'erev Shabbos miba'od yom. They knew when they made the takana that there is always going to be a Friday night of Hanukkah. And they addressed that in their takana. And the way they addressed it was the mitzvah to light Neros Chanukah, the proper zman of Neros Chanukah, the rest of the week, according to the Mechaber, is Tzeis HaKechavim. Not so Friday night. The zman chiyuva of Friday night is earlier in the day, because you can't do malacha on Shabbos. And that's why you could make a bracha and say Vitzivanu. So that's why the Mechaber says Hadlaka Isa Mitzvah applies to Erev Shabbos the same way it does the rest of the week. Because just like the rest of the week, you're lighting at the Zman Chiyuva, Erev Shabbos you're also lighting at the Zman Chiyuva. It's just that Erev Shabbos, the Zman Chiyuv, is earlier. And Chazal knew that, and they were masakin it that way. So that's Pshat in the Mechaber. What's Pshat in the Taz that's Cholik? So let's see footnote number 37. Ubetama davar kasav ataz shahadloka miba'ayim ein nechshavas lahadloka b'zman achiv shehu b'Shabbos. The Taz differs. The Taz says no, not true. That's you're not going to say that the Zman Chiv is different on Erev Shabbos than the rest. Really, the takana of Neres Hanukkah is always at night. Just Friday, you have a problem. You can't do it at the proper time, so you have to do it early. But that doesn't mean that becomes the Zman Chiv. So different perspective, the Mechaber and the Taz. Okay, let's go weiter. Mechaber. Second line down. V'chein, similarly. Until now, the cases that we addressed with the halacha of kavsa ein zokuk is when something external to you occurred to the Hanukkah Neres. You lit the Hanukkah Neres and they blew out. You lit the Hanukkah Neres and you used those floating wicks, whatever it is, and they overturned. So the halacha is kavsa ein zokuk. Since you are mekayim the mitzvah with the hadlaka, you're not responsible to go relight it. Now the Mechaber takes this to the next level. Says the Mechaber, similarly, if after you lit the Neres Chanukah, you see that it's not burning with a very nice flame. So you want to go ahead and take a tweezer and you want to raise the wick, or you want to knock some carbonized material off of the tip of the wick, whatever it is. But whatever it is, you approached the Ner to go do something to the Ner to fix it. And accidentally, while you were fiddling with the Ner, you actually put it out. So now you put it out. It's not that the wind put it out. It's not that something else occurred. You put it out. Still, says the Mechaber, you're still not responsible to relight it. Says the Ramah, Hago. However, all of this notwithstanding, so we have seen that hadlaka is a mitzvah, kavsa ein zakuk, very nice, but says the Ramah, Hago, if you want to be machmer, v'lachzar ulahadlika, and you do want to go ahead and relight your menorah, you can, but ein levarach aleha. However, you do not make a new bracha. Says the Mishnah Berurah, if you want to be machmer and you want to relight it, you could relight it, but you don't make a bracha. Says the Mishnah Berurah, v'hachreinim kasu the achreinim right. It definitely would be proper to go ahead and relight the Neres Chanukah that went out, no matter what happened, no matter how they went out. And certainly, certainly if it occurred on Erev Shabbos, where we saw this machlokes to Mechaber and the Taz, certainly then we should be machmer if it's before the Zman. You have to make sure it's before the Zman. Chas v'chalil, you shouldn't relight it on Shabbos. You should be machmer to relight them, albeit without a bracha. Interesting case now. Let's say you lit your menorah, and we know that there's a halacha of tais v'Shabbos, right? You have to be b'kabel Shabbos a little bit before Shkia. So you went ahead, you lit your menorah, and you said, oh, Baruch Hashem, I lit my menorah, everything's ready for Shabbos, I'm being b'kabel Shabbos. And boom, then suddenly your menorah goes out. So now you can't relight it because you were b'kabel Shabbos. But the fellow standing next to you was not yet b'kabel Shabbos. Are you allowed to ask him to relight it? Says the Mishnah Berurah, yes. If you were b'kabel Shabbos, and then your ner went out, but it's not shkia yet, and there's still time where it's mutter to go ahead and relight it, but you can't because you are Makabel Shabbos. Mutter loyma l'chavere shiadli came. You are allowed to ask your friend who was not yet Makabel Shabbos. You're allowed to ask him to go relight it. Now this is based on a halacha that we learned in Hilchos Shabbos, Siman Reish Samach Gimel, Sif, I think it's Sif Yodalid, where this is always the halacha. Let's say it's during the summer when you make Shabbos early. You make Shabbos early, somebody else didn't make Shabbos yet. Since it's not Shabbos for him, you're allowed to ask him to do malacha, and you're even allowed to be neneh from the malacha that he does. Okay, weiter in the Mishnah Berurah. Mitzvah min hamuvchar. This is a very interesting halacha, and it has a lot of different manifestations. Mitzvah min hamuvchar. There's a mitzvah min hamuvchar, says the Chavetz Chaim, liknois shava l'ner Chanukah, to purchase wax for Hanukkah candles, min mashe noiteith min hanerois bebeis hakneses. If you ever go to one of those chasidische shtiblach that light a lot of candles by the Amid, you'll see that they have a metal tray, and the metal tray is, of course, full of wax. The wax melts off the candles, and it gets stuck all over the place. So he says it's a mitzvah ben amuvcher. If you want to make extra special Hanukkah candles, buy the wax that melts off of the wax candles in the Beis HaKnesses, melt them down, and make candles out of those. Why? Because since one mitzvah was done with that wax, it was used for the Neros of the Beis HaKnesses, mitzvah lehisavid b'hu mitzvah achvita, there's a mitzvah to use it for an additional mitzvah. This is a halacha that we're going to see also when it comes to the question of lighting the menorah on Motzei Shabbos, where you have a ner for Havdalah, which is one mitzvah, and you have a ner for Neres Chanukah, so you should use the same ner. We'll speak about that when we get to it. Also, this is why people sometimes take the leftover wicks and oil and everything from the Neres Chanukah to use it to burn the chametz. This is all because once you did one mitzvah with this material, do another mitzvah as well. Let's move on. Sif Gimel. Ner shel cheres. If you have an earthenware, an unfinished, unsealed earthenware lamp. Now, when you have an earthenware lamp that's not sealed and you pour oil into it, the oil gets absorbed into the clay, into the earthenware, and it gets yucky. It gets all greasy and yucky. Therefore, says the Mechaber, Ner shel cheres, if you have an earthenware lamp, shehidlik by Laila Achas, which you used for one night of Hanukkah, Naasa Yoshan, now is considered old and it's considered ma'us. It's now repulsive once it was used once. Ve'ein madlikin by Laila Acheres, and you cannot use it for another night. Rather, if you're using that type of lamp, you should purchase a new one for each night. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Katan Chav Ches. Cheres, this is referring to an earthenware lamp. Kasva Sfarim. The Sfarim write, Shetoiv kol echad, it is good and proper for each person. Sheyatriach he should have as beautiful a menorah as he possibly can. And so to the individual flames. You should use beautiful wicks. You should use beautiful glasses. You should use beautiful oil. And of course, we have already seen the Maimar Chazal, Haragil Bener, somebody who is careful to make beautiful neros of Hanukkah, beautiful neros of Shabbos, Havyadlan Benin Talmidei Chachamim, he will be zocheh to have children who are Talmidei Chachamim. Ois Katan Chav Tes, you should be back to get a new lamp each night. Acheres, why? Shehu mos ubizay mitzvah, because the used one is repulsive and it would be a bizayin to the mitzvah to reuse it. Let's go weiter in the Mechaber. What do you do if you're using an earthenware ner? And you don't have the ability to get a new one. All you have is this old one that you used yesterday. Says the Mechaber, Masikai, you should burn it out. B'chol laila ba'ur. You should burn it out in a flame to burn out the residue and make it as fresh as possible. Continues the Mechaber. V'ner shel mateches, if you're using a metal lamp, ein tzarich chadash. You don't need a new one because it does not become repulsive when it's used. V'shel zechuches oishel cheres mechusa, if you're using a glass lamp, or you're using an earthenware one that is mechuse, it's finished and sealed with some kind of a sealant, dinoi kamateches, that has the same halacha as a metal ner, where you can reuse them. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Katan Lamed mechuse, what does it mean that the earthenware lamp is sealed or finished? Hainu mitzupa ba'avar, they used to coat it with lead. I believe it means molten lead. Okay. Siv Dalet. We're going to conclude Siman Taf Reish Ayin Gimel. Siv Dalet. Ein chosheshin la psilois lahachlifam ad shetichle. There really is no reason to exchange the wicks between nights. You could reuse the wicks. You can't reuse an earthenware lamp, but you can reuse the wicks of the Neres Chanukah. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Lamed Aleph, because there's no reason why not. She'ein behen bizayin mitzvah. There's no bizayin mitzvah by reusing a wick. The Adarabah, quite the opposite, says the Mishnah Berurah. Heim noichen lahadlik yoser kisheim udlakin kvar. Very often, wicks that are used catch much easier and they burn better. Now, I think every person has to know the wicks that he uses. From what I've seen from the type of wicks that I use, once I burn them one night, again, they get that carbonized material at the tip of the wick and they don't burn so well. But maybe that's because I'm using these ner mitzvah wicks that are made out of twisted strands, and the strands tend to come apart and spread apart and carbonize. In the older days when we just rolled our own cotton wicks, maybe you could use the same wicks over and over. It would actually be better. Hakol lefi inyan. You have to see your particular mitzias. If the mitzias is that an old used wick doesn't burn as nicely, you should use a fresh wick. If the fact is that it burns just as beautifully in Adarabah, it catches even quicker, kol hakavod, use the same wick. Let's go on to Siman Tafrei Shayin Dalet. Shemuter lahadlik miner lener. You are allowed to light one ner Hanukkah from another ner Hanukkah. Ubay be seifim, and here we have two seifim. Says the Mechaber Sif Aleph. Madlikin ner Hanukkah bi ner Hanukkah. You could light one ner Hanukkah from another ner Hanukkah. Let's see Mishnah Berurah Eis Katan Aleph. Ner Hanukkah bi ner Hanukkah. Myri. We are discussing here Milel Rishain ve'elech, from the first day and on. Sheyesh Yosef bi ner Echad. The first day, this says the Mishnah Berurah at first, that on the first day, this halach is not applicable. On the first night, you only have one ner Hanukkah. So what does it mean that you're lighting one ner from another ner? So therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah, Pashtus, this is referring to the second day and on, where you have multiple neris. Umadlik zeh mizeh. So on the second night of Hanukkah, you could light candle number 2 from candle number 1. Inami, or you could say, Belel Rishon, this could apply to the first night of Hanukkah as well. V'yesh shnei anoshim b'bayis echad, if you have two people in one house that are both lighting menorah, so I'm lighting one and my friend is lighting one, shekol echad madlik b'ftei atzmai, we're each lighting our own ner, mutarin lahadlik zeh mizeh. I could light my menorah first, and then Shimon could come and could light his Hanukkah licht from my Hanukkah licht. Even though asar lehishtamish la'orai, even though we're not allowed to benefit from the neris of Hanukkah, at least during the half an hour of the Zman of the mitzvah, but to light one ner mitzvah from another ner mitzvah, that the Mechaber says is okay. Like the Mishnah Berurah says over here, mutarin lahadlik zemizeh dishtehen nerish mitzvahen, because they're both nerish mitzvah, so there's no problem. Also, I assume it applies over here, mitzvah slavle hanois nitnu. It's not that you're being nene from the ner Hanukkah, you're being mekayim a mitzvah with the ner Hanukkah. That's okay. Now, the Mishnah Berurah makes a couple of interesting technical points. Even though we're going to see soon Bezos Hashem Yisparach and Siman Tafreish Ayin Hey, an interesting halacha. Shetzarech lahanicha tchila al mekayma. The halacha is you have to put the Hanukkah ner in the place where it is going to remain. Va'achakach lahadlika, and then you have to light it in its proper place. We're going to see one reason for this halacha is that if you light the Hanukkah ner and then you move it somewhere else, the fact that you're moving it, if somebody is watching you, he might think, oh, that's not a Hanukkah licht. You lit that for your own purposes. Because you lit a ner, you lit a candle, and now you're walking around with it. It's like a flashlight. So it doesn't look like there is Hanukkah. So in order for there to be a hecker, that this is a ner shel mitzvah, you put it down in its place, then you light it, and you leave it alone. So says the Mishnah Berurah, that creates a certain problem over here. What do you mean I could light one ner Hanukkah from another ner Hanukkah? That can't be, because I take my ner Hanukkah, I put it in its place, and I light it. Shimon has to take his ner Hanukkah, put it in its place, and then light it. He can't pick it up, bring it to mine, light it, and then put it down. So what do you mean, madlikin zemizeh? So says the Mishnah Berurah, he gives a couple of answers to this, and we'll see an interesting shart tziyah. Even though we're going to see soon Bezos Hashem Yisparach and Siman Tafrei Shayin Hey, Shetzarech lahanicha tchila al mekayma, that you have to first put the Hanukkah licht in its place where it's going to remain. V'achakach ladlika, then you have to light it. So how could you possibly light one from another? Kvar kosav ataz l'kamon, the Taz writes later on, Dalzman mu'it ein lahakbet al zeh, that if you're just going to move it for 2 seconds, it's okay. So says the Taz, yeah, You can't go ahead, light the Hanukkah licht, and then take a 10-minute walk around the house with it, and then put it down. But if you just want to pick up the Hanukkah licht, light it from another one, and then put it down where it belongs, the Taz says that's fine. So that's one possible answer. Uladash shariach reinim, but according to those who differ with the Taz, the sovereign, and they hold the alzman mut gam keinish lahakbid, that you should be makbid not to move the Neres Chanukah even for a zman muit. So how do you answer according to them? Hachamairi, you could say that over here we're discussing a case. Shayu shneim kavuin b'mekayman. My ner is in its place, so my ner is right over here. Shimon's ner is in its place. Shimon's ner is right over here, but they both have very long wicks. So if I light mine, after I light mine, Shimon could go ahead, bend the wick over, and light his from my wick. That would not constitute moving the Ner Chanukah. I didn't pick up the Ner and move it. I just tipped the wick over to light a second Chanukah licht from the first one. Let's see it inside. Both Chanukah licht are fixed in their proper places. However, they had long wicks, so that we could tilt one wick over to light the other one. And there's no need to actually move the ner. So we saw the issue. The issue of the Mishnah Berurah was, what do you mean you can light one ner from the other one? You can't move the neres. The neres have to be where they're going to be when you light them. So you can't light one, then pick up the other one, bring it there and light it. We have two answers. Either according to the Taz, this that you're going to move one ner for 2 seconds is not problematic, or according to those who argue on the Taz, we have another potential answer. They're next to each other and you could just move the wick over. Now let's take a look at Shar HaTzion, Ice Cotton Dalid, a few lines in to this Ice Cotton of the Shar HaTzion. By me, it's in the second column of the Shar HaTzion, 2 lines down the middle of the line. Eliyahu Rabbah tirates. The Eliyahu Rabbah has a very cute answer to this problem. Tirates by Fanacher. He has a different answer. Demairi, we're talking about a case, shemetaltel ner hadolok. We're going to move the one that was already lit. Umagia lener hamunach. And we're going to bring it to the one that's in its place, umadlika, and we're going to light it. So what the Eliyahu Rabbah is saying is like this. The Eliyahu Rabbah says, the halacha in Taf Reish Ayin Hey says that the menorah has to be in its place when you light it. It doesn't say that after you light it, you can't move it. So you're right. To light one ner, then pick up a second ner, bring it to the first ner, light it from the first ner, and put it in its place, that's problematic. Because you didn't light the second ner in its proper place. Says the Eliyahu Rabbah, don't do that, do it the other way. Light the first ner when it's already in its place, now it's already lit. Now that it's lit, you can move it. Now pick it up, bring it to the second ner, and light the second ner. That's how the Eliyahu Rabbah wants to answer the problem. Achein, however, the Pri Megadim doesn't like this. Siman Tafrei Shayin Beis, because the Pri Megadim brought down a halacha in Tafrei Shayin Beis b'shem Lekutei Maharivail, the Ein Letaltem Ner Chanukah Memekayma B'say Shiura. The Pri Megadim says not only does the menorah have to be in its place when you light it, after you light it, you're not allowed to move the Ner Chanukah for the half hour of the Zman. Why? For the same reason that the menorah has to be in its place when you light it. The reason it has to be in its place when you light it is because if you light it and then walk around with it and put it in its place, it doesn't look like you lit it l'tzarech mitzvah. So too says the Maharivail, if you light it in its place and then you pick it up and you go for a walk, again it doesn't look like a ner mitzvah. So the Maharivail says the menorah has to be in its place when you light it, and it has to remain there for a half hour. So the Pri Megadim does not like this Eliyahu Rabbah. However, the Chavetz Chaim gives a very cute answer for the Eliyahu Rabbah. V'la'anias daiti, the Chavetz Chaim says, in my humble opinion, nearer it seems, the Sover Eliyahu Rabbah that the Eliyahu Rabbah held, Tahaloi kolatam shelo yarmru l'tzarchehu. The whole problem over here is that onlookers shouldn't say that it's not a ner mitzvah, that you lit the ner for its own purpose. Over here, when they see you light another ner, They understand that you're lighting another Ner Hanukkah. So the Eliyah Rabbah held it's not a problem. So here we have a third answer to the problem. We have the Eliyah Rabbah's Eitzah, which is this, that the Mechaber says that you could light one Ner Hanukkah from another one, is you light the first Ner Hanukkah when it's in its place, then you bring it to the second Ner, and you light the second Ner. Okay, now let's go weiter. So again, just reading from the beginning of Sif Aleph, Madlikin Ner Chanukah, you're allowed to light one Ner Chanukah from another Ner Chanukah. However, V'davka lahadlik zemi zeh b'loyem tzoy. That's only if you're going directly from one Ner Chanukah to another one without a middleman. So you could take one Ner Chanukah and light another Ner Chanukah, but you can't take one Ner Chanukah, light a shamish, bring the shamish to another menorah, to light another Ner Chanukah. Because then what you did was, you lit a shamish, which ultimately is a Ner Shel Chulin. It's not a Ner Shel Mitzvah. So you lit a Ner Shel Chulin from a Ner Shel Mitzvah. That you cannot do. Aval lahadlik mizel azal yedei Ner Shel Choil, aser. That you can't do. Says the Mishnah Berurah, bottom line, Kuf Bem Gimel Amud Beis Eis Kat Beis B'Loyam Tzoi, De'ein Bazeh Bizoy Mitzvah, Keved Dishtei and Shal Mitzvah. To light one Ner Mitzvah from another one, you could do because there's no Bizoy Mitzvah. But to light a Shamish, to light a Ner Shel Choil, that you can't do. Continues the Chavetz Chaim. Ve'em Kava Echad Mehaneros. Let's say you lit your Hanukkah Neros. Again, it's the sixth night of Hanukkah. You lit all 6 Hanukkah Neros. 10 minutes later, one of them went out. And you want to relight it. Could you relight it from one of the other Neros Shel Mitzvah? So you want to take candle number 5 and use it to relight candle number 6? Says the Mishnah Berurah, no. Even though the hadlaka is that you could light one Hanukkah licht from another one, that's because shtein Shel Mitzvah. That's because they're both Neros Shel Mitzvah. But let's remember, hadlaka oise mitzvah kavsa ein zakuk. You lit all 6 Neros, one of them went out. You want to be machmer and you want to relight it? You can, but it's not a Ner Shel Mitzvah anymore. So now you can't use one of the other Ner Shel Mitzvah to relight it. Says the Mishnah Berurah inside. If one of the Neros went out, you can't go ahead and relight it from one of the other ones, even though you're not using a Ner Shel Chulin in between. And this is true even if it went out within the half-hour period of the Zman of the mitzvah. Because really, me'ikar adin, there's no mitzvah in relighting that one that went out because kavsa ein zakuk. The karmelon kavsa ein zakuk. So it's only a chumrah to relight it. Therefore, that does not constitute shtehen Ner Shel Mitzvah. That would already be a bizay mitzvah that you cannot do. Ois Katan Gimel, you could light directly from one Ner Mitzvah to another one, but al yidei Ner Shel Choil aser. But to use a middleman to light a shamish from a Ner Shel Mitzvah to light another Ner Shel Mitzvah, that you cannot do. Why? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Mipnei shenireh kibevaze Ner Shel Mitzvah, because now it looks like a bizui mitzvah to the Ner Shel Mitzvah, shemadlik bimenu Ner Shel Choil, because you're lighting a Ner Shel Choil from a Ner Shel Mitzvah. That's a no-no. Afal pishu oisa l'tzarech mitzvah, even though ultimately you're doing it l'tzarech mitzvah. V'ner shel shamish hu b'chlal ner shel choil lozeh. And you cannot light another shamish, because like I said, the shamish is really a ner shel choil. V'ayin l'kabeh b'sif katan zayin. Weiter in the Mechaber, top line, Kuf Bem Daled Amud Aleph. V'yesh matirim gam bozeh. However, there are those, in the Baragoyla, this is brought down from, the Rush brings it down from looks like the Trumas Hadeshen, and from the Ran. So there are those that are matir, even to light a shamish, that you're going to use to light another Ner Shel Mitzvah. Ois Katan Daled Gam Bazeh, Sfira Luhu, these opinions hold. They came into Oisik Kitei Lahavlik Tekef Bimenu Ner Shel Mitzvah, since you're lighting this shamish so that you could immediately light another Ner Shel Mitzvah, Lav Bechlal Bizoyhu, that is not considered a Bizoy HaMitzvah, and that would be okay. Okay. Weiter. V'yesh batirim gam bazeh, top line in the Mechaber, Ela in kein hu be'inyin sheyesh lachos sheyichba haner shel choil koidem sheyadlik ner acher shel Chanukah. So like I said, there are those that are matir to light a shamish from the Ner Shel Mitzvah, so that you can now take that shamish and immediately light another Ner Shel Mitzvah. because it's obvious that you're lighting the ner shel chulin, the shamish, in order to accomplish a mitzvah. But, says the Mechaber, the caveat is you have to be sure that the shamish is not going to go out before you get to light the second ner shel mitzvah. If you're going to go ahead and light the shamish and then go walk to another room and it's going to blow out, now it turns out that it was a bizui mitzvah, because you lit this ner shel chulin from a ner shel mitzvah and you never got to use it for another ner shel mitzvah. Now let's go into the Ramah. Says the Ramah Hago. What the Mechaber said notwithstanding, v'nagu lahachmir b'neros Chanukah, we are noig to be machmir by neros Chanukah, shaloi lahadlik afilu miner l'ner. The Mechaber said that you could light miner l'ner. Says the Ramah, we are machmir not to light miner l'ner. Why? He gives a very convincing, persuasive reason. The ikar mitzvasai einoi ela ner echad. Because let's remember, on the sixth night of Hanukkah, you're going to light 6 ners. But the ikar mitzvah is only the first ner. Ner ishu beisai. The other 5 are mahadrim and a mahadrim. Technically, the other 5 are only hidur mitzvah. The other 5 are not really the mitzvah. That's why you can't be mafsik between the bracha and the lighting of the first ner, because that would constitute a hefsik between the bracha and the mitzvah. But once you lit the first ner, you could say haner salalu, because you already accomplished the mitzvah. So says the Ramah, you're going to light from one ner Chanukah to the other ner Chanukah because the shtehen shel mitzvah? Not so fast. The first one is a mitzvah. The rest of them are hidur mitzvah. So again, says the Ramah, v'nagu lahachmir b'neros Chanukah shaloi lahadlik afilu miner l'ner. Why? The ikar mitzvasai einei ela ner echad. Because the ikar mitzvah is only one ner. V'hashar einei l'mitzvah kol kach. The rest of them aren't really ner shel mitzvah, they're only hidur mitzvah. V'lachein ein lahadlik zeh mizeh, and therefore you should not light one from the other. Says the Mishnah Berurah cut hey b'neros Chanukah. The Ramah said that this chumrah, not to light one ner shel mitzvah from another ner shel mitzvah, he says it by neros Chanukah. By neros Chanukah, where seemingly you have 2 neros shel mitzvah, we're machmer not to light one ner shel mitzvah from the other. Why? Because even though they're both neros shel mitzvah, they're not really on the same level. The first one is the ikar mitzvah, the second one is only hidur mitzvah. The Mishnah Berurah is medayik. The Ramah is saying this chumrah only in the context of neros Chanukah. But by other neros shel mitzvah, we don't have this problem. Says the Mishnah Berurah b'neros Chanukah. The dafka b'neros Chanukah, we only have this issue by neros Chanukah, umitam shemevar likamei, for the reason that the Ramah gives, because even though they're oral neros shel mitzvah, technically they're not on the same level. Aval b'neros acherim shel mitzvah, but by other types of neros shel mitzvah, kigayin shel Shabbos, like Shabbos licht, v'shel beis hakneses, or candles that are burning in the Beis HaKnesses. What are neros shel mitzvah of the Beis HaKnesses? So if you take a look in Siman Kuf Nun Dalid, Siman Kuf Nun Dalid Sif Yod Dalid, the Mishnah Berurah defines neros shel mitzvah of the Beis HaKnesses, where somebody donated oil to the shul or donated candles to the shul for the ma'or, for the light of the Beis HaKnesses. Those neros are neros shel mitzvah. So by Shabbos licht or by the neros shel Beis HaKnesses v'chadoyme, madlikin miner l'ner. You could light one ner from another because they're all the same level. They're all the same type of neros shel mitzvah. So again, by neros Chanukah, we're machmer not to light one from the other because they're not on the same level. The first ner is the ikar mitzvah, the other ones are hidur mitzvah. But by neros shel Beis HaKnesses or neros shel Shabbos, they're all on the same level. Shtein shel mitzvah, you could light one from the other. V'chein hiskim Sefer Chemin Moshe, the Sefer Chemin Moshe agrees with this. Techein hu amad dabar, this is the minig, this is what people do. In the Beis HaKnesses, you could light one from the other. Neres Shabbos, you could light one from the other. V'chein kasav b'chai yodam, and so writes the Chai Yodam. V'chein mashma le'el b'simin kuf nun daled sif yodaled, and so is it mashma in simin kuf nun daled sif yodaled in Hilchos Beis HaKnesses that you could light one there from another. The dafka der shel hedyet ein madlikin miner shel Beis HaKnesses. You can't go into the shul and light somebody Nebuch lo Aleinu smokes, and he wants to go ahead and take a light for his cigarette, which not only it's a ner shel chulin, it's a ner shel bezoyin, and probably could even be, in certain cases, a ner shel avera. If the person never smoked before, he has no right. The Rav Moshe held la halacha, it's usher to begin smoking, because you know it's dangerous. So I don't even like to use that example. I have to think just of another example. You can't go into the shul and light a stam ner that you need for something from the neris of the Beis HaKnesses. But to light one ner Beis HaKnesses from the other one, you could do it. Aval ner b'ner shari. And in Siman Kuf Nun Daled, we don't find that the Ramah protests to the Mechaber and says that we should be Machmer. No, because over there's no room for a Chumrah. All of the narratives of the Beis HaKnesses are on the same level, so you could write one from the other. Mashma, the implication of the silence of the Ramah in Siman Kuf Nun Daled is the Pshitale, the Bazel, Eskan Minig Lahachmer, that over there is no minig to be Machmer. Vayin b'Pri Megadim, Dal Yedei Ner Shel Choyel, Ein Kedai Afilu B'Shar Ner Shel Mitzvah. But, even in the Beis HaKnesses, let's say you have Neris burning over here, and you have Neris burning, let's say, in another room. Let's say the shul has multiple shtiblach. So you want to light a candle from the Amid in this room, and now you want to go bring it to the other room and light a candle over there. And this candle that was the middleman, you're going to blow out, and you're going to use it for something else. So that middle ner is a ner shel chulin. That you should not do even by the neris of the Beis HaKnesses, because now you're lighting a ner shel chulin from a ner shel mitzvah. The Ramah gave the reason for this chumrah, the ikar mitzvah, because the ikar mitzvah is only the first light. Once you lit the first licht, you already yotz to the mitzvah. The rest of the neres are only hider mitzvah, so they're not on the same level. Really, the mitzvah, the ikar mitzvah of Hanukkah is ner ishu beisai. I could light one ner in my house, it covers me and all of the people who live on me, right? So once I light that one licht, yotz to the mitzvah. But according to this, if you have two independent people living in the same house, so each one has to light his own. They can each light one ner from the other. The rest of the neris after the first licht, it's not such a great mitzvah. Kvar kasavnu, and the Chavetz Chaim reminds us, I already wrote, and we already learned this earlier in the shir, she'em nichbe echad min haneros, if you light on the sixth night of Hanukkah 6 lichtalach, and one of them goes out, ein lahadlik medina min neres acheres, you can't relight it from another one, because remember, hadlaka oisa mitzvah, when you lit it, you already accomplished the mitzvah. Now you want to go relight it, that's only a chumrah. So it's technically not an ner shel mitzvah. So you can't use an ner shel mitzvah to light it. The choshgate certainly, she'em nichba hashamish, if your shamish goes out, she'ein lahadlika min ner Chanukah, you can't relight the shamish from the ner Chanukah. Because of Rashal, there's an interesting marshal. Shebe Beis HaKnesses, this is a very tricky Mishnah Berurah. If you didn't look up the Rashal, you wouldn't know what it's talking about. Because of Rashal, Shebe Beis HaKnesses, in the shul, ein chiluk bein hashamish, there's no difference between the shamish on the menorah in shul, lishar neris, to the other neros of the Beis HaKnesses. Not the other neris of the menorah, the other neris of the Beis HaKnesses. So again, think from the perspective of 150 years ago when the shul was lit with neris, right? All of the neris in the shul are considered neris shel mitzvah because they're all giving light to the Beis HaKnesses. Therefore, the shamish, usually the shamish on the menorah, we don't consider to be a ner shel mitzvah. It's a ner shel chulin, right? But in the shul, the shamish is also a ner shel mitzvah. Why? Because it's no worse than the other candles in the shul. All of the candles in the shul are ner shel mitzvah because they all contribute to the light of the shul. The shamish also contributes to the light of the shul. So in shul, the shamish is also a ner shel mitzvah. So it says the Mishnah Berurah, because of Rashal, Beis HaKnesses in shul, ein chiluk ben hashamish l'shar neris. There's no difference between the shamish on the menorah and the other neiros in the shul. Shakala neiros shabasaycha, all of the neiros in the shul kruyim their mitzvah. They're all called their mitzvah. Umishum hachi, and because of this, says the Mishnah Berurah, yesh ligar, we should protest. Now this isn't usually negeya to us, but it probably was still negeya in the time of the Chofetz Chaim. Yesh ligar, we should protest. Ba'oisan shemadlikin neresein al yedei hashifchais miner beis hakneses. There were people who would send the maid to the shul to go get a licht from the shul. They needed a flame in the house. They told the shifcha, go to the shul. There's always neiros burning in the shul. Go to the shul. Get in there. Afilu min hashamish. Somebody's a wise guy. He says, oh, I can't tell her to get a licht from the neiros of the shul because the neiros of the shul are ner shel mitzvah. But today it's Hanukkah. There's a Hanukkah menorah in the shul. And the Hanukkah menorah has a shamish. And the shamish is a ner shel chulin. So I'll tell the shivka to get a flame from the shamish of the menorah. No, you can't do that. Because on Hanukkah, the shamish, even the shamish in the shul, is a ner shel mitzvah because it's no worse than the other candles in the shul. Chutz, with the exception of Matzoi Shabbos, kidei leilach lebeisai laha'ir b'mevuais ha'afelis. Very interesting exception. You know what you could do? On Matzoi Shabbos, when you got to go home after Ma'ariv, and there's no neiros lit outside of the Rishus Harabim because nobody was able to light the neiros because it was Shabbos, you could light a nair from the nair in the Beis HaKnesses to have a flashlight to go home with. If I'm not mistaken, it's brought down in the Medrash that Shaul HaMelech was zoichet to the Melucha because he had a forebear, I don't know, a grandfather or something, who used to light neiros in the Rishus Harabim so people should be able to walk outside in the street and not trip. So that also is considered a ner shel mitzvah. Okay, let's finish Sif Aleph over here. Let's go back to the Ramah. Says the Ramah, 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down the middle of the line. This whole discussion of using the nair of Hanukkah to light something else, and the problem is only negeya while the nairs Hanukkah are burning during the Zman HaMitzvah, for the half an hour. But after the half hour, mutarim ma'anoah. We said that there's an iser lehistamish la'ora, but the iser lehistamish la'ora, the iser to derive benefit from the lights of the Hanukkah nairs, we said, is really me'ikar adin only during the Zman HaMitzvah. After the Zman HaMitzvah, you're allowed to use the light of the menorah. So after the Zman HaMitzvah, you could use the Hanukkah licht to light other lights also. Certainly you could use it to light other neiros. Says the Mishnah Berurah, we saw earlier in Sibit Tafresh Ayin Beis, the yesh paiskim shesovrin. There are paiskim that argue and they hold the cholz ma'ad shedolkim also lehistamish la'oran, that you're not allowed to be mishtamish by the light of the menorah even past the Zman HaMitzvah, as long as the licht are burning. There's an iser lehistamish la'oran, and it seems that the Mishnah Berurah more or less is machriya that we should be machriya that way. Hu hadin the ein lahadlik behen. So the same halacha would apply here. Even after the half hour, you cannot use the neiros shel Hanukkah to light anything else. So nevertheless, near it would seem the ein lahakbar, but zerak le'inyan lahavlik b'menu neiros shel choil. This is only negeya. You should be machmir not to use the neiros of the Hanukkah after the Zman to light a ner shel chulin. Aval ner shel mitzvah. Let's say somebody came home late and he has to light his menorah, and your menorah has already been burning for an hour, and for some reason you have no way to give him a light to light his menorah other than to light from your menorah. So you want to light a ner shel mitzvah. The medina mutter afilu b'sach hashir. Me'ikar adin, the mechaber said that's mutter even during the half hour to light one ner Chanukah from another ner Chanukah. Al kol panim ein lanu lahachmer achasha avar hashir. Okay. So Baruch Hashem, we got a decent amount of Kuf Mem Daled Amid Aleph done. I hope that will translate into picking up another day on the Dirshu schedule. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schus of limud HaTorah should be megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rabban Shem should say Yeshua's refuahs parnasim sheduchim to all those in need, and we should be zeichet to see the bias geld tzedek v'meher v'yameinu. Amen. Be well.